For hundreds of thousands of years, humans walked this earth without any clothes at all. But then, everything changed.
No jacket, no shoes. Not even a simple piece of fabric. Then, almost out of nowhere, everything changed. People started covering their bodies. But why? Most people think they already know the answer. It's because they got cold. Seems pretty obvious, right? But here's the thing. That answer doesn't actually explain the whole story. It wasn't because humans suddenly discovered winter. And it definitely wasn't because they suddenly became embarrassed. In fact, the real reason is so unexpected that scientists spent years arguing over it. And the weirdest part? The biggest clue wasn't hidden inside an ancient cave. It wasn't buried next to a 30,000-year-old skeleton. It wasn't even an old piece of clothing. The clue was hiding somewhere almost nobody would have thought to look. So if clothes weren't really invented just to stay warm, what actually made humans start wearing them? Let's solve the mystery. Let's start with the answer almost everybody believes. Humans got cold, so they made clothes. Case closed, right? Well, not exactly. The second you take a closer look, that explanation starts falling apart. Here's why. Humans didn't wear clothes for hundreds of thousands of years. Think about how crazy that sounds. No raincoats during storms. No blankets at night. No boots. No gloves. No coats. Nothing. They walked through pouring rain. They slept out in the open. They hunted for food with nothing covering their bodies. And somehow, they survived. Sure, life wasn't easy. People got sick. People got hurt. A lot of them didn't live very long. But clothes weren't stopping them from surviving. So here's the question. If humans could already survive without clothes, what suddenly changed? Because something definitely did. And whatever it was, it changed the future of our entire species. That's our first real clue. But here's where this mystery gets even stranger. If staying warm was the only reason humans invented clothes, then the timeline makes absolutely no sense. Think about it. Long before people were making clothes, humans had already lived through freezing nights. They survived brutal storms. They dealt with cold seasons over and over again. Some human ancestors even lived during periods when huge parts of the planet were much colder than they are today. So why didn't everyone suddenly start wearing clothes back then, if cold weather was enough? Shouldn't clothes have shown up way earlier? That's the part that had scientists scratching their heads. The pieces just didn't fit together. The old explanation sounded good, but the evidence kept pointing somewhere else. Something happened that changed everything. Something big enough to make people say, from now on, we can't survive the way we used to. Scientists had to stop looking at caves, stop looking at old bones, and start looking somewhere nobody expected. Because the next clue didn't come from humans at all. It came from one tiny creature that's been living with us for thousands of years. And believe it or not, that tiny creature knew something about human history that we didn't. At this point, you would probably expect scientists to find the answer somewhere obvious. Maybe inside an ancient cave. Maybe carved into a rock. Maybe hidden next to the bones of an early human. That would make sense. But that's not what happened. The biggest clue came from something so small that most people would have ignored it completely. A tiny creature. A parasite. Something that has been living with humans for thousands of years. Sounds pretty weird, right? I mean, how could a tiny bug possibly tell us anything about one of the biggest changes in human history? But that's exactly what happened. Because this little creature was leaving behind a clue. A clue that humans never even realized they had. And the strange part? It wasn't just any parasite. It was a special type of louse. The same kind of tiny creature that lives in clothing. Now, that might sound like a random detail, but it created a huge mystery. Because clothing lice cannot survive without one thing. Clothes. They don't live on your head like normal lice. They live in the fabric people wear. Which means, at some point in human history, someone had to start wearing clothes first. And when scientists studied the DNA of these tiny creatures, they found something surprising. The clothing louse had separated from head lice thousands of years ago. And that separation gave researchers a clue. A clue about when humans likely started wearing clothes regularly. Suddenly, this tiny parasite became like a time machine. It was showing scientists a moment in history where humans made a huge change. And the answer wasn't what many people expected. So scientists stopped guessing and started following the evidence. They asked one simple question. When did this tiny creature first appear? At first, it seemed like a strange question. Why would anyone care about a bug? But the more researchers looked, the more interesting it became. Because the timeline didn't perfectly match the old idea that humans simply invented clothes because they got cold. Something else was happening. The story was bigger than just winter. And that's when scientists realized something important. Maybe clothes weren't created because humans were trying to escape the cold. Maybe clothes became important because humans were going somewhere new. And that changes the entire story. Because for most of human history, Our ancestors stayed in places where their bodies could handle the environment. Warm areas, open landscapes, places where their natural abilities gave them a chance. Humans had something special. We weren't the strongest animals. We weren't the fastest. We didn't have sharp claws. We didn't have thick fur. But we had something else. Our brains. Our ability to create tools. Our ability to adapt. And eventually, humans started moving farther. Much farther. They left the places they knew. They entered environments that were completely different. And that's when things got serious. Because the farther they traveled, the more the environment started fighting back. The air became colder. The winds became stronger. The winters lasted longer. The nights became dangerous. Suddenly, the human body had a problem. Our bodies were amazing, but they weren't built for every place on Earth. And that's when clothing became something completely different. It wasn't just something nice to have. It wasn't just a way to feel comfortable. It became a survival tool. At some point in human history, humans did something unexpected. They started making clothes look different. Not just useful, but interesting. They added things. Feathers, shells, animal teeth, different colors, patterns, small decorations that served no purpose in keeping them warm. And that's when something new appeared. Something that still exists today. Fashion. Think about that for a second. Thousands of years before fashion brands. But this leads to an even bigger question. Why do humans care so much about appearance? Why do we decorate things? Why do we want to stand out? Why do we want others to notice us? The answer goes deeper than fashion. It connects to something very human. Our need to communicate. Our need to belong. Our need to show others who we are. And clothes became one of the easiest ways to do that. But here's the biggest secret of all. The story of clothing was never really just about what humans wore. It was about what humans could do because of it. Clothes didn't just protect people. They changed the limits of human survival. Before clothing, some parts of the world were almost impossible for humans to live in. Freezing environments, extreme winters, places where our bodies alone weren't enough. But clothing changed that. It gave humans a new advantage. Suddenly, the planet became much bigger. Humans could move into new areas, explore new lands, survive in places they never could before. And that one simple idea changed everything. Because humans weren't the strongest animals on Earth. We weren't the fastest. We weren't the biggest. But we had something no other species had. The ability to create solutions. And clothing was one of those solutions. So now we can finally answer the mystery. Why did humans really start wearing clothes? It wasn't because humans suddenly became embarrassed. It wasn't because one day they woke up and decided they wanted fashion. And it wasn't simply because winter arrived. The real reason was survival. Humans were exploring. They were moving into new environments. They were entering places where their bodies alone couldn't keep them alive. Clothes gave them the protection they needed. And from that moment, the world changed forever. A simple idea made from animal skin and natural materials helped humans reach places they were never supposed to survive. And today, every time you put on a shirt, a jacket, or a pair of shoes, you're using an invention that helped shape the entire story of humanity. Pretty crazy, right? Something we do every single day started as a solution to one of the biggest challenges our ancestors ever faced. If you enjoyed solving this mystery with me, hit that subscribe button because there are thousands of hidden stories from human history that most people have never heard. We uncover the strange questions, the forgotten discoveries, and the mysteries that changed our world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next mystery.